The time was 3:14 a.m. In the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon, the silence was shattered not by a siren, but by a scream that sounded too guttural, too mature to belong to a 4-year-old boy. Sarah jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't the first time. For the past month, her son Toby had been waking up at exactly this hour, soaked in cold sweat, clawing at his throat. When Sarah and her husband Mike rushed into the room, they found Toby sitting upright in his bed. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't looking at them. He was looking through them. His small hands were gripping his neck so tightly that his knuckles were white. When Mike tried to calm him down, whispering that it was just a nightmare, Toby slapped his hand away. The boy's voice dropped an octave, losing its childlike lisp, replaced by a rasp that sent a chill down Mike's spine. "The water is cold," Toby whispered, shivering violently. "Why didn't the airbag go off, Mike? You said you fixed it." Mike froze. He had never fixed an airbag in his life. He was an accountant, but the name... Toby didn't call him Dad. He called him Mike. But the terrifying part wasn't the name. It was what Toby said next, tears streaming down his face as he pointed to a phantom pain in his chest. "Tell the guy with the snake on his arm to stop hitting me, please. I won't tell anyone about the money. Just tell him to stop." This is the story of a nightmare that didn't end when the sun came up. It is the story of a cold case from 1993 that the police had buried, and a 4-year-old boy who dug it back up. Welcome to the strange reality of reincarnation. To understand the horror that was about to unfold, we have to look at the weeks leading up to that night. Toby had always been a happy, normal child. He loved Paw Patrol and chicken nuggets. But shortly after his 4th birthday, his personality began to fracture. It started with a phobia of water. Bath time became a war zone. Toby would scream that he was sinking, and that the mud tasted like oil. Then came the drawings. While other kids in his preschool were drawing stick figures of their families and bright yellow suns, Toby was using only black and red crayons. He drew the same scene over and over again. A bridge, a jagged line representing a river, and a car upside down at the bottom. But the detail that disturbed his teacher the most was the license plate. On every single drawing, Toby scrawled the characters KL492. A random sequence? Or a memory? One afternoon, Sarah was driving Toby to a playdate. The radio was playing a classic rock station. Suddenly, the opening riff of Nirvana's heart-shaped box came on. Toby went pale. He covered his ears and started rocking back and forth in his car seat. "Turn it off!" he screamed. "This was playing when we went off the bridge. Turn it off!" Sarah pulled over, shaking. "Toby, honey, it's just a song." "What bridge?" Toby looked at her, his expression incredibly somber. "The erratic bridge, Mom, near the old mill. I was driving my Camaro, the blue one. I wanted to show it to Richie, but Richie was mad." "Who is Richie?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Richie is the bad man," Toby said simply. "He has a snake on his arm. He promised to pay me for the job, but he hit me instead. He pushed the car. I couldn't get the belt off." Sarah and Mike were rational people. They were secular modern Americans who believed in science. They took Toby to a child psychologist, Dr. Evans, hoping for a diagnosis of an overactive imagination or night terrors. Dr. Evans suggested that Toby might have overheard a movie or a news report. But Sarah knew better. The specific details were too granular. The blue Camaro, the snake tattoo, the broken airbag. The tension in the house grew. Mike didn't want to encourage the fantasy, but Sarah began secretly recording Toby's ramblings. She started building a file. One night, while Mike was asleep, she typed the license plate number Toby had drawn into a public records database, not expecting anything. KL492. Nothing came up. She tried variations. Still nothing. She felt foolish. But then, Toby walked into the living room. He wasn't asleep. He walked over to the laptop, pointed at the screen, and sighed with the exhaustion of a grown man. "No, Mom, it's not a new plate. It's an Oregon plate. From the old days. Before I died." The breaking point, the moment where rationality completely collapsed, happened on a Sunday drive. Sarah decided to take a different route home to avoid traffic, driving through a rural town called Blackwood, about 40 miles from their home. They had never been there before. As they passed the town sign, Toby gasped. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where I lived. Turn left, Mom. Turn left at the diner." Mike, driving, refused. "Toby, stop it. We are going home." "Turn left," Toby screamed, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I need to see if my mom is still there. I need to tell her I'm sorry I stole the cash." Panic ensued. To calm him down, Mike aggressively turned left. Toby began giving turn-by-turn directions with eerie precision. "Right at the big oak tree. Go past the high school. It's the yellow house with the broken fence." They arrived at a dilapidated yellow house. It looked abandoned, but a light flickered in the window. Toby stared at it, tears rolling down his cheeks. "That's my house," he said softly. "My name is Leo. Leo Thorne." Mike stopped the car. He pulled out his phone and Googled, "Leo Thorne, Blackwood, Oregon." The color drained from Mike's face. His hands shook so hard he almost dropped the phone. He turned the screen to Sarah. It was a digital archive of a local newspaper from November 1993. Headline: Teenager missing. Local star quarterback. Leo Thorne vanishes. Police suspect runaway. The photo showed a handsome 19-year-old boy leaning against a bright blue 1979 Chevy Camaro. But that wasn't what made Sarah scream. It was the detail in the second paragraph of the article. Leo was last seen arguing with a local mechanic named Richie Vargas. "Richie," Sarah whispered.
Hey!
Mike looked at his son in the rearview mirror with a mixture of horror and awe. The conflict was no longer about whether this was real. The conflict was that their 4-year-old son was a murder victim, and the killer was likely still out there. The comeback was not easy. The validation of the internet search gave them a direction, but it didn't give them a solution. Sarah and Mike went to the Blackwood Police Department the next day. They met with a weary deputy who looked like he had seen it all. When they started explaining that their 4-year-old son was the reincarnation of a missing teen from 1993, the deputy's expression shifted from boredom to pity. "Look, folks," the deputy sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I remember the Thorne case. Everyone knows Leo ran away to California. He stole $5,000 from his dad's safe before he left. The case is cold, but it's not a murder. Go home. Get your kid some help." They were dismissed, humiliated. They sat in their car in the precinct parking lot, feeling the weight of the dead end. It seemed hopeless. How could they prove a murder with no body, based on the dreams of a toddler? "He's still there," Toby said from the back seat. He was coloring in a coloring book, looking entirely unbothered by the police rejection. "Richie put me in the car in the water. Not the river, the quarry. The one behind the old cement factory. He pushed it off the edge." Mike looked at Sarah. "The quarry? That place has been fenced off for 20 years. "We have to go," Sarah said, her eyes hardening. "If we don't, he will never sleep. He will never be just Toby." They decided to bypass the police. They went to the local library and pulled the old maps of the town from 1993. There it was. The old Miller Quarry, located just 3 miles from where Leo Thorne was last seen. The quarry had flooded in the late 90s and was now just a deep, murky, man-made lake. They needed proof. They couldn't dive into a quarry. But Sarah had an idea. She found a yearbook from 1992. She opened it to the shop class photos. She placed the book in front of Toby. "Toby, look at these people. Do you see Richie?" Toby didn't hesitate. He slammed his small finger onto a picture of a young man with a mullet and a sleeveless shirt. On his bicep, barely visible in the grainy black and white photo, was a tattoo of a coiled cobra. "That's him," Toby said. "That's Richie." Sarah looked up the name Richard Vargas. He wasn't in prison. He was still in Blackwood. He owned a used car lot on the edge of town. They weren't just chasing a ghost. They were chasing a living, breathing killer. The intensity ramped up. Sarah and Mike knew they couldn't confront a potential murderer, but they needed to force the police to act. They hired a private sonar team, a group of volunteers who specialized in finding submerged vehicles. It cost them their savings, but they had to know. On a foggy Tuesday morning, the team met them at the fenced-off perimeter of the old Miller Quarry. Toby was there, holding Sarah's hand. He was unusually quiet, staring at the black, still water. "It's right there." Toby pointed to a specific drop-off point where the cliffs were steep. "I hit the water hard. The glass broke." The dive team was skeptical. The water was deep and full of debris. They launched the sonar boat. For hours, nothing happened. The screen showed only rocks and old shopping carts. Mike began to lose hope. Maybe it was just a coincidence? Maybe they were crazy? Then, the sonar technician shouted, "I've got a large anomaly, metal, about 40 feet down. It's shaped like a chassis." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The diver geared up. Sarah held her breath. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. Finally, the diver surfaced, gasping for air, giving a thumbs up. "It's a car!" he yelled. "It's upside down. Old Chevy model, and license plate is partially covered in silt, but I see a K and an L. Sarah burst into tears. Mike grabbed Toby, hugging him tight. But the horror wasn't over. The police were called. The crane was ordered. As the rusted, algae-covered hulk of the blue Camaro was winched slowly out of the water, a crowd began to gather at the perimeter fence. Among the onlookers, an older man with graying hair and a distinct limp watched. He was wearing a mechanic's shirt. Sarah noticed him. She noticed the way he was wringing his hands. She zoomed in with her phone camera. On his faded forearm, the green ink of a snake tattoo was still visible. It was Richard Vargas. He had come to watch his secrets rise from the deep. The payoff was grim but necessary. The police pried open the rusted door of the Camaro. Inside, preserved by the cold, oxygen-deprived water, were the skeletal remains of a young male. He was still buckled into the driver's seat. But the skull told the true story. A massive fracture on the back of the head, inconsistent with a car crash, but perfectly consistent with a blow from a heavy wrench. The investigation moved rapidly after the discovery. Confronted with the physical evidence, and the fact that forensic technology could now match the tool marks on the skull to tools found in his old shop, Richard Vargas confessed. He admitted that Leo hadn't stolen the money. Richie had. Leo had found out and threatened to go to the police. Richie knocked him out, put him in the car, and pushed it into the quarry to stage a runaway scenario. The town of Blackwood was in shock. Leo Thorne hadn't abandoned them. He had been waiting for justice for 30 years. But the real resolution happened in a quiet cemetery a week later. Leo's remains were finally given a proper burial next to his parents. Sarah and Mike stood at the back, holding Toby. Toby looked different that day. The dark circles under his eyes were gone. He looked lighter, younger. He watched the coffin go into the ground. "Is he sleeping now?" Toby asked, his voice sounding like a normal 4-year-old again. "Yes, honey," Sarah said softly. "He's sleeping." Toby nodded, turned around, and spotted a butterfly. "Can we go get ice cream now? I want chocolate." He didn't ask about the bad man. He didn't mention the water. The memories of Leo Thorne had begun to fade the moment the Camaro broke the surface of the water. The soul had finished its business. The nightmare was over. Toby was just Toby again. But Sarah and Mike would never forget. They knew that sometimes the dead don't just tell tales. Sometimes they come back to solve them.